Hello everyone. There are different branches of stylistics such as formalist stylistics, functional stylistics, pragmatic stylistics, cognitive stylistics, corpus stylistics, feminist stylistics, and so on. But today's lecture will be focusing on formalist stylistics. This lecture will be uploaded in two parts. In part first, we will have a detailed discussion on formalist stylistics, while in the second part, we will be doing formalist stylistic analysis of a poem. So let's begin first. What is formalist stylistics? Origin in Russian formalism. So formalist stylistics can be traced back in Russian formalism, or the roots of formalist stylistics can be found in Russian formalism. So it introduces stylistics as the study. Formalist stylistic introduces stylistics as the study of style in language, particularly how language is used in literary text. So formalist stylistics, they see that how the use of language, or they investigate the use of language in a literary text such as poem, novel, drama, etc. So it explains that stylistics examine both literary and non-literary language, focusing on the unique choices an author makes to convey meaning and evoke effects. So when we doing stylistic analysis, so stylistic analysis is not only of a literary text, it can be also of a non-literary text. For example, of a newspaper, of an article, okay, of a conversation, of a talk show, right? So on the other hand, it can be also, a stylistic analysis can also focus on a literary text, such as any poem, any novel, any short story, any play, right? So you can do stylistic analysis of a literary as well as of a non-literary text. Historical context of formalist stylistics. Stylistics as a field emerged in early 20th century, deeply influenced by Russian formalism. As in the beginning I told that the roots of stylistics can be found in Russian formalism, right? So it emphasizes that Russian formalism sought to understand what makes a text literary by focusing on the language and techniques used. So what do formalists do? Formalists, they focus, right, or they investigate to understand what makes a text literary by focusing on the language and techniques used. So they consider and they understand that it is a language that make a text literary. How a language can make a text literary? Because a literature has a unique way of using language. For example, there'll be defamiliarization, there'll be de-atomization, there'll be deviation, there'll be parallel structure, right? There'll be repetition, and there'll be figurative language. So these are the different and unique way of using language in a literary text, and this is what they think make a literary language different from non-literary one. Russian formalism and overview. Russian formalism was a literary movement in Russia from approximately in 1915 to 1930s. So as in the on the previous slide we discussed that the beginning of stylistics, that is in early 20th century. So what was going on in early 20th century? There was a literary movement, and that movement is known as Russian formalism. So it comes out from Russian formalism, or it was a Russian formalism, this literary movement, which gave a passage, a route to stylistics, particularly to formalist stylistics. Formalist aimed to treat literature as an object of scientific study, focusing on its form and language rather than its content or social context. So, before Russian formalist, the focus was given to two things. One was the social context, and one was the content, the substance, the subject matter. So when somebody was doing analysis of a poem, right, or critical analysis of a poem, or just analysis of a literary text, so they focus on the content, the subject matter, the substance, as well as the social context in which a text was produced. Right? Like, for example, if you wanted to analyze the character of Hamlet or any Shakespeare play, so you'll have to focus on the social and political context in which this play was produced. Right? And what is the substance and the content without focusing on the unique tools of language or the techniques of language. For example, the role of phonology, the role of morphology, the role of syntax, the role of discourse, right? And the role of pragmatic. So these all linguistic features were kept aside. So that's why it was then formalist stylistics which make a literary text scientific. And this was then adaptation from Russian formalism, because it were Russian formalists. For the first time, they make a scientific study of a literary text, and later on, this technique was adopted by formalist stylistics, and they also analyze a text the way Russian formalists they did. Key idea: what makes literature literary? Russian formalist questions the essential nature of literature, asking what makes a piece of writing literary. And their answer was that literature is distinguished by the language it uses and the way it manipulates language to create effects and meaning. So first they ask question that what makes a text literary, and then they answer that what makes a text literary, that is the unique way of using language, right? Sometimes you will deviate from the expected norms of a language. Sometimes you are going to foreground an idea or concept, right? Now, these level includes phonological level, morphological level, syntax level, discourse level, pragmatic level, right? So, I mean that you have to use language in a unique way in order to manipulate language to create effects and meaning. Now, key focus of Russian formalism. Language as the core of literature, right? What they thought. So Russian formalists emphasize that literature is primarily about language rather than just content or narrative. So what was previously thought, the critics, they thought, right, that literature is about the context in which a literary text was produced, or it was a kind of narrative. But now Russian formalists, they rejected this idea. They say that no, literature is primarily about language, that how language is used and how meanings are created by using language differently in a piece of text. Fine. So they focus on the unique ways language is used in literature distinct from everyday communication. Right? As I told that in everyday communication, we don't foreground something, we don't deviate language, we don't use parallel structure, we don't use repetition, we don't use that much figurative language, right? Metaphor, simile, person. We do use also in everyday situation, in everyday language, but the use will be quite little compared to a literary piece of text. And even if you're using in everyday life situation such kind of techniques or tools in language, so that is because of a literary language. And then we tell someone, okay, that the language you are using, that is poetic, right? The language you are using, that is a literary one. Okay, even we tell a person, because we know that the figure of speech here she's using, right, or such kind of metaphor, simile the person is using, so we tell him, we want, okay, that this is a poetic language. So we know that the language here she is using, that has been adopted from poetry, from literature. Literary analysis through language. The Russian formalists argue that thorough analysis of a literary language could reveal what sets literature apart from other form of writing. Now, they propose that understanding the language of literature is a key to appreciating its distinctive quality and artistic value. So that is important, okay, what was previously thought that the content and the context, they were important. But now, Russian formalists, they rejected this idea. They say that in order to understand literature or a literary piece of work, it's important to understand the language of that literary text. What are the distinctive quality and artistic value of a language that is used in a literary text? Fine, so this was their focus. Introduction to the key concept by Russian formalists, that is deviation. Definition. Deviation refers to how literary language diverge from ordinary everyday language. The purpose is that this deviation is often deliberate, designed to create aesthetic effect, and how to draw attention to the language itself. What will be the impact of the deviation? By examining these departures, Russian formalists sought to understand how literary language catches the reader's attentions and stand out as spatial or artistic. So this slide has three parts. First, it defines, right, what is deviation. It refers to how literary language diverges from ordinary everyday language. So when you break the expected norms of a language, or you are using language in a unique way that is different from ordinary language, this is called deviation. And mostly we can find deviation in poetry. So what is the purpose of deviation? The purpose is that this deviation is often deliberate. Intentionally, the poets or the author, they deviate, designed to create aesthetic effect and to draw attention to the language itself. So they are deviating language, or they deviate language because to create aesthetic effect on the mind of the reader, or to draw their attention, right? To draw their attention, to focus that why certain ideas have been deviated by using language or by using distinct type of language. So the third part of this slide, that is the impact. What will be the impact of deviation? By examining these departure, Russian formalists sought to understand how literary language catches the reader's attention and stand out a spatial, that is called spatial or artistic effect on the mind of the reader. So this is the impact. Now the idea of foregrounding, that was also given by Russian formalists, and we can also find this idea in formalist stylistics. So definition. Foregrounding is the technique of making certain elements in a text more prominent or noticeable. So this foregrounding is achieved through deviation or parallelism. Now, what occurs in foregrounding? Certain ideas or certain concepts are foregrounded. How they are foregrounded? They are foregrounded through deviation. And this deviation can be phonological deviation, syntactic deviation, morphological deviation, graphological deviation, discourse deviation, pragmatic deviation, right? So they deviate, okay, or they foreground through deviation in order to make certain ideas more prominent or more noticeable by the reader. So what is the purpose of foregrounding? This draws the reader's focus on specific aspects such as certain words, phrases, structures that carry particular meaning or artistic significance. So some ideas are more important, right? Or the writer wants you to focus it deeply. That's why certain ideas are foregrounding. Okay, how they foreground? Through deviation. No, or through parallelism. What will be the effect? The effect will be foregrounding emphasizes patterns and structure that enriches the reader's experience and enhance the aesthetic impact of the text. So this will be then the effect of the foregrounding to have a powerful and positive impact on the mind of the reader, right? Now, the impact of deviation and foregrounding on stylistics. Now, we are here because these ideas are borrowed from Russian formalism and we can find them in formalist stylistics. Influence on stylistic, these two concepts, deviation and foregrounding, became the fundamental for the study of stylistics. Stylisticians adopted these two core ideas, deviation and foregrounding, from Russian formalism. Focus on language use in literature. Stylistics develop as a field that emphasizes that how language is specifically crafted and used within literary contexts. The focus is on analyzing the distinctive quality of literary language while still acknowledges its ties to ordinary language. Because whatever we are using in a literary text, if that is a unique way of using language, so it has been taken from ordinary language. Because phonology and morphology and syntax, discourse and pragmatics, which is an ordinary language, and these ordinary language has been manipulated, has been used differently in a literary text. So still there is a tie between a literary and non-literary language, because this literary language is actually based on non-literary language. If there was no non-literary language, no everyday life language, so perhaps we wouldn't produce literary texts in a unique way or in a distinctive way. Integration with everyday language. Unlike earlier approaches that may have separated literary language from everyday speech, modern stylistic embraces the continuity between literary and everyday language. This allows for a broader understanding of how stylistic features in literature are rooted in familiar linguistic structure but used in innovative way to create artistic effect. In the past, those critics, they parted from everyday life language, but stylistic it creates a bridge between literary and non-literary language. So they understand that non-literary language is also important. Formalist stylistics and defamiliarization. Focus of formalist stylistic objective. Formalist stylistics examine how writers use language to create a unique effect in literature, literariness of language. This approach highlights the distinctive quality of literary language, often referred to as its literariness. Concept of defamiliarization. What we are already familiar, the writers, they are here to make us unfamiliar with something. So why they are making us unfamiliar, or defamiliar when an idea that already we are familiar with, because they want to refresh our mind, or they want to give us a fresh look or perspective of something, right? Because our eyes might uh, might have got bored. Our mind might have got bored by reading the same linguistic structure over and over from the last 150, 60, 40, 30 years. So they are using, okay, a language in an unfamiliar way. So they are doing what they are doing, they are defamiliarizing us. Definition. Defamiliarization is a technique where the writer make readers see things in a new or unfamiliar way. Purpose is what? The goal is to break routine perceptions and present ideas in a manner that encourages a fresh perspective. So this is the purpose, okay? There's something we are already familiar and they make us unfamiliar in order to give us a fresh perspective of something. How writers achieve defamiliarization. Use of unusual or unexpected language. Writer employs creative, non-standard language choices. This language use can appear uncommon or surprising, prompting readers to pause and reflect. So when you look at, okay, that uncommon way of using language or unexpected use of language, you pause for a while, you stop for a while, and you think, you rethink that why this language is used in such and such way. Then you think, okay, that might be that the writer, the poet, want to have some significant idea in these words, right? Or to have a very positive impact on the minds of the reader. Effect on the reader. This technique is intended to slow down the reading process by encountering unfamiliar language. Readers are encouraged to consider deeper meaning and focus on specific aspects of the text. Role of formalist statisticians. Analyzing language structure, formalist stylistics study the structure of language within text. Their analysis focus on identifying specific language choices that produce the effect of defamiliarization. So what a formalist stylistic is doing, they investigate and they identify specific language choices they produced by the writer and the effect of this is defamiliarization. So this, if you're doing formalist stylistic analysis, so you have to investigate what linguistic choices made by the writer. The purpose of analysis, this approach aims to uncover how language makes readers rethink familiar ideas or everyday perspective. Now, formalist stylistics and textual analysis. An approach of formalist stylistician. Primary focus formalist stylistician concentrate on analyzing poetic text by examining the formal feature of language. An objective, their goal is to understand how language creates impact through its structure and style. Now, just checking the slides. We are here. Techniques in formalist stylistic: deviation, parallelism, and repetition. Introduction to key techniques. Formalist stylistic implies specific techniques to imply important part of a text. Technique discuss deviation, parallelism, and repetition. So these are the techniques which formalist stylistics will focus. They are focusing on deviation, parallelism, and repetition. And through repetition, parallelism, and deviation, the writers, they foreground an idea or concept. Now, the purpose, these techniques are used to highlight certain elements, encouraging readers to interpret the text more deeply. So where something is deviated through language and the parallel structure is used or repetition, so there will be deep analysis, or deep analysis will be required of that part of the text. Deviation occurs when the expected language rules such as grammar or structure are intentionally broken. So intentionally the writer broke such structures. So Common use in poetry. Poets often use deviation to break conventional language pattern. Effect on the reader. What will be what? That this departure from normal language surprises readers and create an effect known as defamiliarization. And defamiliarization make the reader see things in a new way by presenting familiar idea or object in an unfamiliar form. Parallelism. Parallelism is the use of repetitive pattern or structures within the text. Purpose is what? The repetition of structure serve to emphasize certain part of the text. Effect will be what? Effect on the meaning will be what? By creating structural patterns. Parallelism draws attention to the key idea. These repeated patterns enhance meaning and add significance to the text, making these sections stand out more vividly. So, when certain ideas are represented through parallel structure, right, means okay that something is important or significant. That's why that these ideas are presenting in a parallel structure. Repetition. Definition. That repetition is the deliberate use of the same word, phrase or line multiple times in a text. So when you repeat a word again and again, this is called repetition. So repetition, it means though, okay, that this idea, this concept is very much important. That's why these words are repeated. And sometimes the synonyms are used, sometimes the same expressions are used. This is also called repetition. The purpose is what? Repetition highlights specific word or idea, giving them more importance. Effect on the reader. The techniques encourages the reader to focus closely on the repeated elements. It reinforces key concept and prompting readers to consider their deeper meaning. So when you're doing stylistic analysis, formalist stylistic analysis of a poem, so you have to keep these certain things in your mind. So in the next part of this lecture, we will be doing stylistic analysis of a formalist stylistic analysis of this poem. So keep watching and enjoy learning with me. Please don't forget to subscribe and like the channel, and please provide your valuable comment in comment section. Thank you so much.